Half a year of protests, but where is the progress? Saturday marked the 26th week of anti-judicial reform protests in Israel, with participation remaining strong as around 300,000 were in attendance across the country, with over 100,000 in Tel Aviv. This comes as the government is continuing its push towards the reforms, with a parliamentary reading on the Reasonable Standards Law this week, which will limit the court's interference in government policies. Critics say the government will use this to push forward policies previously deemed as unreasonable, including appointing ministers who are banned from holding office, whilst proponents believe it allows the government to carry out policies it was elected to carry out. But despite the reforms seemingly powering through, it will be doing so without one of its most controversial pieces of legislation. In an English-language interview with the Wall Street Journal, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that he will be dropping the override clause, the clause that allows a Knesset majority to overrule the High Court's decision. But what more would it take to stop the protesters and reach a national consensus on the reforms? How far should the government compromise? Should the opposition rejoin talks for a compromise? And, with half a year of hindsight, have the judicial reform protests been a success?
So let's get to it. Have the judicial reform protests been a success? As always, we begin with our quick fire round, 30 seconds each to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick up the conversation from there. So Yaniv, Segal, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
Thank you. Well, I think the protests have been an unprecedented success. Not a single law of the so-called judicial reform has passed today, which I think is a direct result of the mass ongoing protests across Israel. It is clear to all that the protests play a major factor in the decisions of policymakers, and they will not pass a single law without seriously damaging the economy and the military and leaving the country in chaos practically.
Yeah, Amir Weitmann, your take.
Well, it depends how you measure success. On one hand, if indeed success is being measured by a refusal of passing any law, then yes, indeed, it has been a success. There's no denying the fact that, as your previous interviewers said, no law as of yet has been passed. Yet, if you looking at the welfare and the success of the country, there has been an unmitigated disaster. We can see that the economy has been tremendously harmed by the lack of agreement within Israel. This has caused tremendous harm to the country.
Last but not least, Carrie Keller-Lynn, your thoughts?
I think the biggest success of this protest have been waking up the ground and waking up professional and diplomatic allies to Israel. And that is the pressure, I think, that has been most effective in decision-making, in the coalition's decision-making. Because, again, to remind everyone, there are very limited tools for anyone outside the coalition to take to actually change the outcome. It is completely within the coalition's control. And so we are very much still in the middle of this. Remains to be seen what will not happen. But I think the biggest success is showing international interests that there is something happening in Israel.
And on that note, lady, gentlemen, let's please feel free to interact, to engage in a conversation from this point onwards. And Mr. Weitmann, I do want to begin with you because there seems to be two Netanyahus, so to speak. To foreign audience, he's saying overriding the override clause or the bypass bill. To his coalition members, not giving this one up. Which Netanyahu should we believe?
No, my understanding is that as of now, the override clause, the general override clause, is dead. He's talking about having some sort of a limited override law on a very, on a very, very, very narrow issue concerning the ultra-Orthodox going into the army or some draft or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but certainly this is very, very, very anecdotal. This is not the general override law that we were speaking about a few months ago.
Yeah. And in this respect, Yaniv, I do want to ask, because there seems to be this very common phrasing being used nowadays of unilateral legislation. But if I'm not mistaken, according to the parliamentary system, it is quite a a paradox to dub any legislation as unilateral. If there is a majority, it's a legislation. If there is no majority, it's no legislation. Bottom line, how far should the coalition, should the government compromise? Well, when it has the ability to pursue its goals.
First of all, there is this truth that is not true at all, that the coalition was chosen in order to make this judicial reform, actually judicial overhaul. They haven't spoken about it before the elections. I mean, it's a total lie. They talked about taking care of the economy, taking care of the society, and we see that in every measure they are failing. Even if you compare it to the last coalition that is now the opposition, or in any other standard. I mean, you can see the violence, you can see the markets. So they are not taking care of what they said they will take care of, and they are trying to make a judicial overhaul, which they never spoken before, beside Simcha Rothman, which wrote a book about it. But Netanyahu, as usual, is saying different stuff to different people, as you said, in Hebrew and in English. It's totally different than Netanyahu's. And there is trying, but we have to look at what Netanyahu is doing and not at what he says, because we can see who he took for his coalition, for his government, and they are not aiming for the better good of Israel country, but to make it an extreme right religious country, and to save Netanyahu from its trials. So. Yeah.
We will get to the trials later, but Carrie Keller-Lynn, help us understand, or let me just ask you again, how far should the government go in terms of compromising?
Well, the government absolutely has the power not to compromise,
right.
But the fact that we are 6-7 months into this event and it has not put forward a unilateral plan, or at least has not finalized a unilateral plan, I think really speaks to what our panelists are talking about, which is that there's such deep disunity in the country over this issue, and more than that, such deep interest in this issue. Such an interest that, over 500,000 Israelis come out on the streets to protest or to support what is being proposed. And such a momentous occasion, especially in a country that does not have a constitution, really needs to be legislated with care. This is not something that majoritarian rule could push forward and still have Israel claim to be a liberal democracy, because the core of what is being pushed, if you look at the complete picture, is to undermine liberal democratic values. So when we're talking about fundamentally changing the governance system of the state, I think it's very dangerous to say that a coalition that won by a mere 30,000 vote difference has the right to unilaterally legislate this, despite the fact that, according to the rules, absolutely it can.
Mr. Weitmann.
Well, it's of course blatant lies, I'm sorry to say. First of all, before the last election, of course, we spoke about it. Yaniv Levin won the Likud primaries on that platform, and everybody who was identified with the constitutional overhaul and changes did extremely well in the primaries exactly for that reason, and everybody who actually wanted to listen could. Now, of course, it's true that we didn't only speak about that, we spoke about a whole host of issues. That's, of course, completely true, but that doesn't mean we didn't speak about that. That's the first point. Second point is, of course, it's also a complete blatant lie to say that the constitutional changes are a threat to Israeli liberal democracy. It's quite the contrary, actually. It's redressing the imbalance between the different institutions in Israel, between the legislative power and the Knesset, the representatives of the people, which, over the past 30 years progressively have gone more and more in the direction of the unelected judges. This is redressing that wrong. This is actually bringing democracy back to Israel. Let me remind everybody, right? Because maybe people have forgotten, right? That democracy is the power of the people, by the people.
No, that's majoritarian rule. And I'd love to get away from platitudes. And if you mind, I'd like to just explain what's actually happening here and remind people who haven't been following this.
That you refuse the rules. You refuse the plain rules of democracy. That does not mean that we should not not strive for compromise. We should.
Democracy doesn't start and end with elections. Democracy is about civil society. And fundamentally, what this package is trying to do in a country that doesn't have a constitution is to say that the main check on political power, the Supreme Court, is going to be basically weakened to the point that it cannot effectively check the political realm. And we live in a country where both the executive and the legislative branch are fundamentally controlled by the same thing, because any functioning coalition is controlled by the government. So they are the same branch. And so the main check is the Supreme Court.
Yaniv,
Let me add.
Yaniv.
Yeah, let me add that.
No, hold on. I'm making a point here, and my point is that the package is going to first tell the court what it can or cannot rule on, exercise judicial review over. That's the current law being pushed through reasonableness. Then the override clause, as you said, it might come back in a very moderate way, but that's fundamentally going to say that if the court can actually exercise judicial review, just kidding, the Knesset has the ability to reinstate laws. And then what we're also going to do, and this is coming down the line, everyone's been clear about that, is remake the way of appointing the court such that if a court can exercise judicial review and can get it past Knesset override, we're also going to change the judges who sit in that court. And you say it's democratic to change the way that the judges are appointed, and so what? But that's fundamentally, you're saying that you want to change content-based decisions by making huge structural changes.
Yaniv.
No, I completely agree with what you just said, and I just want to say that it's nothing new to us. For the people of Israel, we are aware of the fact that you just mentioned, and what was said previous to that is the same, is the exact lies that Bibi is saying in English, and not even daring to say it in Hebrew, because he knows that we know exactly the facts. There is no separation of powers. The coalition and the government are the exact same thing, and we refuse to let them uncontrolled and unlimited power when the only body, authority that protected human and civil rights in Israel is the Supreme Court of Israel, and not the parliament, which is supposed to do that, but for the moment is only targeting the Israeli democracy instead of targeting the real and true problems of Israel that we can see in every part of life in Israel. The cost of living, the divided society, the security situation in Iran and Hezbollah, everything is in total chaos, and it's all led by the same coalition that continue to accuse the last coalition of 6 months. I mean, it's ridiculous what they're saying, and that's exactly what you just said.
Okay, and on that note, we do need to take a very short break, but obviously we have so much more to unpack, so hold your thoughts right there. Yaniv Segal, Amir Weitmann, and Carrie Keller-Lynn. A few minutes, and we'll be right back with part 2 of the summit, and how is the Netanyahu legal cases affecting, not affecting all of it, and vice versa. Do not go anywhere. A few minutes, and we're back. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Amir Weitmann, Yaniv Segal, Carrie Keller-Lynn. Thank you all very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, but before we get back to our conversation, I do want us to take a look at these scenes from last night's demonstrations. These are not pro and anti-judicial overhaul protests, but those who are supposedly from the same side, two groups opposing the judicial overhaul, the Brothers in Arms versus the Breaking the Silence, the anti-occupation bloc. If you will, take a look.
Hey!
Okay, so another quick fire round, 30 seconds each. At this point, are protests really about the judicial overhaul? Are protests being hijacked? What's happening there? Amir Weitmann, take the lead, please.
Well, the reality is that, if you look at most of the measures that the right-wing, the government currently in place is trying to advance about the constitutional changes, you have to see that most of these changes have actually been endorsed in the past by Lapid himself, certainly by Gidon Saar, by Lieberman and others. So when you have actually a discussion about the issues themselves, you will discover that the differences are actually not that great. The real problem is not the content of the reforms, but rather who is pushing the reforms. And here we see, unfortunately, that there's a denial of the legitimacy of the current government.
Carrie Keller-Lynn, your thoughts?
In some ways, the whole judicial reform debate is also the latest instance of this great power struggle over different visions of what it means to be both Jewish and democratic. While most Jews in Israel believe that the state should be Jewish and democratic, they define those terms very differently. And on the democratic side right now, we're seeing a difference ranging from liberal democracy and conceptual values on one side of the debate to power exclusivity on the other.
Yeah, well said. Yaniv, Segal, last but not least.
Yeah, so actually, maybe it might be that some of these proposed laws has been proposed before, but we never saw this kind of package of laws against the democratic system being proposed at once. So they didn't manage to pass them at once. So now they're trying to pass them piece by piece. We don't have a constitution. We don't have nothing to protect us besides the power divided, the division of power between the authorities. So we don't believe this government working for the best interest of us all.
Oh, okay, and Yaniv, I do want to begin with you, the part of our conversation, everyone. The protest reaching the International Ben Gurion Airport tomorrow, yet again, police officials warning of anarchy, and overall, it seems that the protests are somewhat losing the popular credentials or the public support, so to speak, triggering at least anger in some parts of society. Is the protest movement losing its momentum?
No, I don't think so. Actually, you can just look at the protest of yesterday. Thousands of Israelis, more than 100,000 people in the streets. I don't think that's a lack of power. And we use this. It's the protest tomorrow is going to be non-violent as usual, but we need to make, we want to show the power of the people and our will to continue as long as the democracy of Israel is being threatened. So I don't think you see a lack of power now. We can see that none of the ministers and the Knesset members of the coalition can go nowhere without being followed by protesters. So you can see that we still have resilience and we have power, and we'll do whatever it takes as long as there is a major threat on Israeli democratic structures and values like that.
So what will it take to end the protest, Carrie Keller-Lynn, and reach national consensus?
I think you said it yourself, national consensus. The coalition is playing a game where they hope that by dragging this out and making the process more slower and more moderate, as they say, that they can slowly kind of lull the protests into submission, into sleep. There's a core group of about 80,000 people in the center of Israel who seem to come out every week. Perhaps this will change if we see another 6 to 7 months with no big changes.
But the opposition is still out, Carrie, right? The opposition.
The opposition is still out. The opposition is still out, absolutely. But the opposition is still quite angry and quite aligned with the streets right now. And the streets are saying, we won't accept any sort of unilateral change to the fundamental liberal democratic values of Israel. And to back them up, frankly, all the professional layer within the Israeli government and the Israeli judicial system is agreeing with them. We had the Attorney General's office last week calling this bill to reduce the reasonableness standard for decisions made by public officials, opening a normative black hole for transparency and oversight. And so there's some really big problems still being discussed, even if they're smaller in scale than the ones that were initially introduced. And I don't think the protest movement will die out either until there's no more support for it or until this is completely shelved, which is their demand.
Okay, Amir Weitmann, I want to jump to another topic, not unrelated, let's put it that way. former police chief Ronnie El-Sheikh saying there was an expectation that Netanyahu would resign when the criminal cases against him were launched. Is El-Sheikh essentially admitting the legal cases, or there was a political motivation behind the legal cases?
Well, I think you need to be extremely disingenuous to believe that this is not the case. Whatever Netanyahu's faults, I think it's very, very difficult to believe that all this was purely professionally motivated. I think we've seen over and over again that this is not going the way the opposition, or the Parlitud,
The state prosecutor's office, yeah.
The prosecutors want this to go. I mean, we've seen that even today and last week with Milchen. We've seen that with what the judges themselves said a few days ago. And funnily enough, after the judges actually said that they have to, the prosecution has to backtrack on the most serious offenses, then all of a sudden it has become completely kosher for all kind of people, including the former prosecutor, General Attorney Moshe Lador, to say that judges he's bad-mouthing them. All of a sudden it's fine to bad-mouth judges. I mean, this is ridiculous. We all understand that this is a political witch hunt. Now, again, this is not to say that Netanyahu is white like Snow White, but it is clear that at least some of this has got very, very clear political motivation.
Yaniv, what do you make of this statement?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he just repeated what Netanyahu himself said when it was.
But what do you think? What do you think of this statement by the former chief of police?
I think that he's saying that what is the expectations, or what the expectations were in Israel before Netanyahu's regime and before the destruction of the society's backbone. And there was moral standards that if a prime minister is facing charges, so he is expected to resign. Netanyahu himself said it. So, and he himself also, he kind of, this is Netanyahu kind of tricking everyone, putting moral standards to others that he doesn't put to himself. Yeah. We see that they had like different codes to different presents that Netanyahu repeatedly asked and got over the years from
not
different
according
kind of people.
to the man on the stand tonight. We do need to wrap it up, Yaniv, so I'm cutting you in the middle just to hear from.
I'm not using code words with my friends for taking things.
Well, different friendships,
But I don't use code words if it's something
Can
legal.
I wrap it up by saying,
Carrie, exactly.
Can I wrap it up by saying how wonderful our judicial system is? That is the Supreme Court that actually koshered Netanyahu forming a government and being a prime minister despite the indictments, despite his ongoing trial, saying that an ongoing court case could not determine who can or cannot be a prime minister in this country.
Hey, I see you liked it. Want more? Just hit the subscribe button right here. Go on. I know you want to.